The man unfolded the paper to reveal the number 7. It was in Maomao's own writing, of course. Maomao returned to her seat, pondering what could be happening. The room was full of boisterous and cheerful voices. Much of the audience seemed to be pleasantly drunk. Lahan and the others were waiting studiously for Maomao to return. "So tell me, what was that?" Lahan asked, now full of enthusiasm. "Search me. Wait, did she slip a little coin into your hand, perchance? Unlike some of us, I don't work that way." "Well, neither do I. There's no beauty in it." This man made no sense to Maomao. He adored even the smallest coins, yet he claimed there was a distinction between beauty and impurity in them. But she noticed Rikusen chuckling to himself. "You can see I've got nothing," Maomao said, opening her hands and rolling up her sleeves to prove she hadn't been bought off. "Did someone see you then? I really doubt it. Only the white lady and her assistant had been up on stage with her. Maom didn't think anyone had observed her writing the number. Also, which pipe she'd put the paper into had been obscured by the cloth. But maybe, she thought. She glanced toward the stage. It was bathed in the uneven glow of the lantern hanging from the ceiling. She had thought perhaps there was a mirror. The performers could see which number she had written in it, but it did not seem to be the case. It seemed difficult to hang anything from the ceiling. You would also need something to hang in the first place. However, the white lady's eyesight was the biggest problem. Anything more than a shaku in front of her likely appeared hazy. Maomao was still thinking about this when the next part of the performance started. A new desk was brought forward and a variety of utensils were arranged on it. The lady used a pair of chopsticks to pick up a small, thin piece of metal from among the utensils. She also chose a dish. Her assistant took the metal and the dish, then set them on a tray. They began walking around the theatre with them. The piece of metal looked like a sheet of polished bronze. The dish was deeply recessed, so the liquid in it would not spill. The assistant skipped the second floor. He evidently did not have time to make his way all the way up there, provoking a few shouts of protest from above. But in Maomao's opinion, that was just what you got for sitting in the cheap seats. When the man returned to the stage, the white lady took the metal sheet and the dish back from him. She placed the metal in the dish and then placed the dish in a fire that had been lit almost without anyone noticing. She began chanting what sounded like a spell of some kind, and then she started to dance. In the gloomy, misty room, her entire body seemed to shine. When the dance was over, the lady took the chopsticks and removed the piece of metal from the fire. Its color had changed. The reddish color of the bronze had become a pure silver. Several people in the front row exclaimed with wonder. Someone shouted, "The bronze turned into silver." Others asked, "What? Really?" Those in the back could not quite see what was happening on stage. However, they could see other people's reactions and pressed forward with interest. The guards kept anyone from climbing onto the stage, but people could see what was happening. The lady was washing the metal with a liquid, then she wiped it dry with a cloth. This time she held it directly in the fire. The shouting became louder. People exclaimed, "The silver has changed to gold." Indeed, the silver sheet had turned to shimmering gold. The lady used her chopsticks to cool it, then placed it on the dish. Her assistant held it up for everyone to see the shining gold. "Are you able to explain that?" Lahan asked Maomao, wiping his spectacles. Maomao smirked. "Yes, later. For now, let's enjoy the show." Her eyes were sparkling. She was loath to look away from the performance on stage. With Lahan, her voice took on an edge that she normally reserved for use in the pleasure quarter. It might have sounded a little strange to Rikusen, but considering that he served someone very strange indeed, maybe he was willing not to let it bother him. Maomao had other things on her mind anyway. This is fascinating, she thought. She was so eager to see the panoply of unusual techniques on display that she almost forgot to blink. The woman might not be an immortal, but it was clear they could not dismiss her out of hand. The white lady proceeded to show them a wide variety of intriguing entertainments. She placed a wet stone on a piece of paper and recited a spell. Shortly after, they burst into flames. She produced butterflies seemingly out of thin air. As they were flying away, they also appeared to incinerate themselves, turning to ash in mid-flight. Each display earned a chorus of oohs and ahs from the audience. Finally, the lady held up a shimmering silver liquid. Every eye in the house was fixed on the mysterious substance as she poured it into a small cup and drank it down. Maomao almost choked, barely resisting the urge to jump out of her seat. Thankfully, she stopped herself before getting to her feet, and instead focused intently on the lady. "I hope you've had another enjoyable evening at my show," the lady said with a smile, and then descended the stage. The audience members continued to fill the theatre with excited chatter about what they had just witnessed. Some people's eyes flickered as if with flames. Others looked adoringly at the spot where the immortal had just been. Only Maomao's group seemed less engaged than the rest, perhaps because they hadn't indulged in the wine. "She certainly is something special," Rikyusen remarked, finally reaching for his cup. Maomao instinctively stopped him, looking at him uneasily. He asked, "Is something the matter?" Maomao said yes, and she took her own cup in her hand. She sniffed the wine, then put a single drop on her skin. When she saw how it behaved, she lapped up the smallest mouthful of the drink. She said it was mixed with something. There wasn't much alcohol in it, actually. It was closer to juice, very drinkable, but it also had several other conflicting flavors. It seemed the drinks had been adulterated with several other substances, perhaps including some salt. Maomao said it was not poisonous. Even though the alcohol content was not very high, it seemed likely to be strong. That was all there was to it. Then there was the flickering lantern light. The darkened room added to the atmosphere. The eerie mist and the ghostly woman on stage completed the scene. The strange phenomena the audience had witnessed was certainly enough to inspire blind faith in someone. Maomao wondered how many of the audience members had been moved to exactly that. As she mulled it over, she continued to sip at her drink. "It is a little salty," she thought. It would be better without, she reflected, and that was when it hit her. She plunged a finger into her drink, then ran it over the tabletop using the juice like ink. "What are you doing?" Lahan asked. "You wanted to know what is going on." "Here it is." Maomao looked around at them. If that stuff is like this, then that must have some trick to it too. She wished she had looked around more closely when she was on stage. Had there been something there, it had been mistier up there than in the seats. It was warmer, making her head hurt and interfering with her concentration in some odd way. Mist. Fog. She thought it might be steam, perhaps from something being boiled behind the stage. That would explain the heat as well. But why did it make her head hurt? She had felt like a fly was buzzing around her ears. What was that? Just as she felt she was getting an idea of what it might be, she caught a glimpse of the white lady in the wings of the stage. Maomao stuck her fingers in her mouth, closed her lips and blew. "What are you whistling for?" What a base way to show your appreciation. Lahan was looking at her with narrowed eyes. Maomao's whistle had not been very loud. The chatter around her was noisy. The sound should not have carried far. And yet she saw the lady look around when she whistled. "Ha." "Now I understand." Maomao grinned and began eating the snack cakes. It was cold outside. They could have easily waited until they returned to the verdigris house to discuss what they had seen. However, Lahan and the others seemed eager to learn what was happening as soon as possible. Therefore, they decided to stop at a restaurant and talk there. Maomao chose a rather expensive place, which left Lahan less than thrilled, but she didn't mind. A waiter showed them to their seats, and once they were seated at a round table, Maomao asked for the waiter's recommendations for dishes, along with a bottle of their finest alcohol. "Have you ever heard of moderation?" Lahan grumbled. "The big earner says what? My family bought something very expensive just last year, so we are practically broke." She knew this perfectly well. He had bought it from the verdigris house. First, Maomao decided to explain how the white lady had changed bronze into silver and gold. It's very similar to what they call transmutation. Maybe she should have simply said lion and shoe. In fact, making gunpowder fell under the same category. Transmutation was a subcategory of lion and shoe. It was a way of turning base metals into noble ones. Maomao played with the spoon the waiter had brought. The art of lion and shoe was aimed at prolonging people's lives. However, many of the things attributed to it were pure bunk. The histories told of an ancient emperor obsessed with gaining immortality. He had instead lost his life trying misguided ways of obtaining it. Yes, the two were quite similar, but if I had to distinguish them, I would say it is closer to what they call alchemy in the West. "The West?" Lahan asked. Maomao nodded. "Yeah." Lahan seemed to be thrown off by the fact that Maomao spoke more politely to Rikyusen than to him. Maomao thought perhaps Perhaps she could speak more casually to Rikusen now. She remembered her father telling her about this, but she had never seen it herself. The metal did not actually become silver or gold. It had a metal plating that could be scorched off in the fire. This changed it from one thing to another. Maomao wanted to try it herself, but her old man refused to tell her the necessary ingredients. She suspected that even if he had looked, they wouldn't have been things she could easily find in a simple apothecary's shop. "What are you saying? What is this plating?" "It is when you cover one metal with a shell of another metal," Maomao said, holding the spoon between the fingers of both hands. "If you would like to know more, you should ask my father. And if you would be so kind as to tell me what you learn now, you must tell me." Her eyes flashed. The self-burning paper could be accounted for with the byproducts of that process. If the butterflies had been made of paper as well, that might explain them. The mist in the theatre had also made it difficult for the audience to see clearly. They had been drinking wine intended to make them quite drunk. Even she, Lahan, and the others who had not been drinking were almost fooled. None of the other spectators, who were feeling the effects of the wine, would have suspected a thing. The paper butterflies sounded a lot like a traditional trick from the island country to the east. It involved cutting shapes out of a very thin, high-quality paper. "Explain how she was able to read your mind then," Lahan said, still puzzled. "Yes, about that." Maomao was just trying to decide how to explain when the waiter returned with their pre-meal soup. Maybe this will work, Maomao thought, and she plunged her spoon into the soup bowl. "Paper," she said. "Look at you, giving orders," Lahan said, scowling at her, but nonetheless he produced some paper from the folds of his robe and handed it to her. Maomao ran the soup-laden spoon over the paper, producing a childish scrawl. She gave the paper a quick wave to dry it out and the scrawl disappeared. "Do you see it?" she asked. "The wet areas have shrunk slightly. That is a bit too close an observation. Bah. Show some respect to your adopted brother." "Absolutely not," Rikusen spoke up. "So what does this have to do with what we saw?" "Watch." Maomao went over to one of the lanterns on the wall. She gently removed the frame and held the paper over the naked flame. Lahan and Rikusen looked shocked, and while that was gratifying, this shouldn't have been new to them. Jinchi and Gaoshan would have understood much sooner, Maomao thought. The parts of the page that had been strewn with soup had singed and darkened in the flame. "You see?" "Hardly. What does this have to do with reading someone's mind?" Maomao shoved the spoon into Lahan's mouth. "How's it taste? Like they use seafood stock. And a little salty." "Yes, it has salt in it." "So what?" "Well, there was salt in it. Specifically in that grainy ink she'd used. No wonder it had felt so unpleasant to write with. There was salt in the ink. If you blend it in well enough, you might not notice it, just as you don't notice it in this soup. But it is there, just as it is here." Putting it to a flame clearly revealed that there was more than just water present. "Are you saying she singed the paper to reveal the number?" "How? No, she didn't, but there are other ways." There had been a dark writing pad under the paper Maomao had used. Plenty of ink would have soaked into it. Lahan looked at the slightly blackened paper, tracing the lines with his finger. "So that's what was going on?" "Yes." "I believe that is correct. It was something mixed into the ink. It did not have to be salt. Anything that could be blended with the ink but then remained behind when the ink dried would work. Let us suppose, for the sake of argument, that it was salt. Maomao would have written her number with the salty ink. The ink would have soaked through to the pad underneath. When the ink dried, the salty numeral would appear. It was a pattern of white powder on the dark writing pad. I see, Rikusen said, clapping his hands in understanding. "What about the tubes then? How did she know which one you'd put the paper in?" "Oh, that." Maomao tore the paper in two. She folded the halves, then put a hole through the middle. She put a finger between the two pieces of paper, then blew between them. This created a dull whistle. "I assume you know how a flute works. You blow into it and it makes a sound. And how do you change that sound? You change the number of holes the air comes out of." "Even I know that much. Didn't he get it yet?" "No, maybe not. He hadn't seen the tubes where she'd hidden the paper up close. Suppose the tubes acted like the holes of a flute. I'm sorry, but I didn't hear them make any noise. The theatre had been full of sounds of bells and gongs. But there had been another sound hidden by the louder noises. I got a pretty bad headache standing there. I suspect there was a sound so high-pitched that it couldn't be heard, Maomao said. Loud noises could hurt the ears. She suspected that even if she didn't consciously detect a sound, it might have subconsciously bothered her. A high-pitched noise. Yes, Maomao said, and then blew into her flute. Did you hear that? Of course I did. How about this then? She made the noise higher, whistling the same way she had back in the cave with Jinchi. Lahan made a face and Rikusen looked puzzled for a second. The bodyguard, however, narrowed his eyes. I heard that too, Lahan said. I sort of heard it, Rikusen reported. Then the guard, sounding unsure whether he was allowed to join in the conversation, said I didn't hear anything. Maomao felt a bit bad for him. He was obviously embarrassed. Good, she said. You're not supposed to. It gets harder to hear as you get older. The guard was in his mid-30s. He was clearly shocked to realize he couldn't hear the sound. His reaction made him look somewhat like Gaeshan. Maybe all middle-aged people acted that way. Not everyone can hear sounds to the same pitch, Maomao informed them. There were variations even among people of the same age bracket. Some people have better eyesight than others. Similarly, some people have better hearing. Maomao suspected, although she had no way to prove it, that people with bad eyes sometimes compensated by developing better ears. She said, I think that Mystic has extremely sensitive hearing. The lady had reacted to Maomao's whistle from a considerable distance, even with all the noise around them. Maomao suspected the white lady regularly practiced discerning whistling sounds. This made her think of the hunting dog Lihaku had been playing with during their excursion. This would also explain why there were no flutes in the musical ensemble at the white lady's performance. Both the vertical flutes and the horizontal flutes produced changes in sound. They did this by opening and closing a series of holes along the length of the instrument. If the 100 tubes in that box were like the holes of a flute, Maomao pushing the paper into one of them would be like closing a hole on the instrument. Are you suggesting that she could discern 100 different sounds, and that was how she knew which pipe it was? If that box was like a flute, what served to blow into it? There is a very simple method. What if, with the gongs and bells as signals, someone blew into the flute 10 times? The box had been covered with a veil. This would have allowed the lady's assistant to be nearby, operating something that would force air through the pipes. You wouldn't even have to learn 100 different sounds. 10 would be enough. As for how they blew into the pipes, the mist explains it. The mist was steam, which meant they were boiling water somewhere to produce it. What if the desk had been designed so that the vapor would enter it from below? The audience was so focused on what was on the desk that they wouldn't notice any small devices underneath. Makes sense now. Lahan and the others nodded. There is one last thing, Maomao said, thinking of the silver liquid the lady had consumed at the end of the show. That substance is a very strong poison. I do not know if she actually drank it, but it is definitely not something to try at home. You should warn other high officials about it when you have the chance. She gave Lahan her most serious look possible. Several days later, the white lady and her show vanished without a trace. In their wake they left only a series of mysterious food poisonings among the merchants of the capital. What had her objective been? The female immortal who looked like the white snake was gone, but the mystery remained. Long ago those in power had sought an elixir of immortality. They consumed silver that looked like water, believing it would prolong their lives. Little did they know all it would do was shorten them. Because of the way it moved, the metal became known as quicksilver. Maomao wondered what had happened to the white lady after she had drunk the stuff. Had she been pretending, or had she truly consumed it? If the quicksilver could be expelled from the body while still liquid, it would not be too poisonous. However, if it was dissolved in steam and inhaled, or combined with another substance into a new form, then it was very toxic. Once upon a time, it had been considered a palliative. The difference between a medicine and a poison was often a matter of application, Maomao reflected. She gazed at the vibrant scarlet of a chunk of cinnabar, and resolved to put the entire matter out of her mind. Chapter 8 Proficiencies. I'll excuse myself then. Maomao didn't say a word as the man who had delivered the letter to the apothecary shop exited. His job was finished. She read the letter, remaining expressionless throughout the entire time. Then she put it in a letter box. It was from Jinchi, but it wasn't quite the usual business correspondence. Maomao crossed her arms and cocked her head, thinking, what should she do? What should she do? Business from Jinchi always meant trouble, but this one seemed like more trouble than most. She could hardly refuse it, however, which meant she needed to figure out how best to prepare. How was she going to explain this one to Grams? Her thoughts were interrupted by the jabbering of a couple of noisy kids. Chu Yu and Zulin were carrying baskets full of fresh herbs. Oh yes. They mentioned they wanted to eat kusa mochi. She watched them for a moment without much interest, but when she saw them heading toward the kitchen, she quickly grabbed them by the collar. What are you doing? Chu Yu asked. Let me see those, she said, searching through his basket and inspecting the plants inside. How could he get this so wrong? Maomao glowered at the assembled herbs. How could you manage to find wolfsbane around here? She stared at Chu Yu, who sat down sullenly. Beside him, Zulin, the younger of the two poor girls who had recently joined them, looked on with worry.